The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the valley as Preston Vance galloped his stallion toward the setting sun, his heart pounding with an urgency that had become all too familiar. Blood seeped from a bullet graze on his arm, but it wasn't his own safety that drove him forward with such desperation. It was the three small souls waiting for him at the homestead, and the woman who had irrevocably changed his life. Montana Territory, 1876. The landscape spread before Preston like a painting, rolling hills bathed in amber light, tall grass swaying in the evening breeze. But the beauty of the frontier could not mask its dangers, especially for a man with his reputation. Once the fastest gun in Wyoming, Preston had fled that life after a bloody shootout in Cheyenne left 7 men dead and his conscience heavier than the Colt revolver strapped to his hip. "Come on, Eclipse," he urged his midnight black horse. "They're waiting." As he crested the final hill, the modest homestead came into view, a sturdy log cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, a small barn, and a corral where 2 horses grazed peacefully. Preston had built it all with his own hands over the past year, every nail and board a testament to his determination to leave his violent past behind. But the sounds that reached his ears made his heart sink. Children crying again. The high-pitched wails of toddler twins and the hiccuping sobs of a 5-year-old boy. It was the same nearly every evening when he returned from working at the Hollister Ranch several miles away. Preston dismounted quickly, wincing at the pain in his arm. He tied Eclipse to the hitching post and hurried to the door. Before he could open it, the crying abruptly softened, and then he heard a sweet, melodious voice rising above the children's tears. Sophia Carter was singing, her voice clear as a mountain stream and twice as soothing. He paused with his hand on the door latch, allowing himself a moment to simply listen. The song was an old Irish lullaby, one Preston recognized from his childhood, though his own mother had never sung it with such tenderness. "The silver moon is shining bright, the stars are sparkling too. So rest your head upon your bed, I'll watch over you." The door creaked as Preston entered, and 4 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Sophia sat in a rocking chair by the fire, her auburn hair falling loose around her shoulders. 5-year-old Michael curled against her chest while she balanced the twins Ellie and Emma, one on each knee. The children's faces were still tear-streaked, but their crying had stopped. "You're home," Sophia said, relief evident in her voice. Then her eyes widened as she noticed the bloodstain on his sleeve. "Preston, what happened?" "It's nothing," he assured her, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Stray bullet from some drunks shooting at bottles. Caught me by surprise on the ride back." Michael scrambled down from Sophia's lap and ran to Preston, wrapping his arms around his legs. "Pa, you promised to teach me to throw a lasso today," Preston ruffled the boy's sandy hair. "Tomorrow, son, I promise." The word son still felt strange on his tongue. None of the children were his by blood, but in his heart, they had become his in every way that mattered. Sophia gently placed the now drowsy twins in their shared cradle and moved toward Preston. Without a word, she helped him remove his coat and examined his wound. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a chair. "I'll clean this." As she gathered supplies, Preston watched her move about the cabin. She had changed. Since he'd first met her 8 months ago, the frightened widow with 3 young children had been replaced by a woman of quiet strength and determination. Her green eyes still held shadows of the grief she'd endured, but there was light there too now. The children were upset again. Preston asked as she began cleaning his wound. "They always are when the sun starts to set," Sophia replied, her fingers gentle despite the sting of the antiseptic. "They worry you won't come back." Preston's jaw tightened. "I always come back, I know that," she said softly. "But they lost their father. They're afraid to lose you too." The story of how Sophia and her children had come into Preston's life was one marked by tragedy. Her husband, Thomas Carter, had been a homesteader trying to carve out a life in the Montana Territory. 8 months ago, while Preston was still building his cabin and working odd jobs at neighboring ranches, a gang of outlaws had raided the Carter homestead 10 miles away. They had killed Thomas in front of his family and burned their cabin to the ground. Preston had been riding home that night when he spotted the flames on the horizon. He found Sophia and the children huddled in a shallow creek bed, hiding from the men who had murdered her husband. The twins had been just 6 months old, Michael not yet 5. With nowhere else to go and winter approaching, Preston had offered them shelter in his unfinished cabin. It was supposed to be temporary just until spring, when Sophia's brother could send money for her to travel east. But as the seasons changed, so did their arrangement. Preston finished building the cabin with an extra room for Sophia and the children. He found steady work at the Hollister Ranch, and somewhere along the way, the idea of Sophia and the children leaving became unthinkable. "There," Sophia said, tying off the bandage. "It's not deep. You were lucky." "It wasn't luck," Preston replied, catching her hand before she could move away. "I promised them I'd come home. I promised you." Something flickered in Sophia's eyes, a warmth that made Preston's heart beat faster, but she gently withdrew her hand and turned to the stove. "Supper's nearly ready." "Could you check on the twins? They should be asleep by now." Preston nodded and moved to the cradle where Ellie and Emma lay side by side, their matching faces peaceful in sleep. At 10 months old, they were growing fast, already trying to pull themselves up to stand. Michael watched him from his small bed in the corner, fighting to keep his eyes open. "Pa," the boy called softly, "will you tell me about the buffalo hunt again?" Preston sat on the edge of the bed. "Not tonight, son. It's late and you need your rest." He pulled the blanket up to Michael's chin. "Tomorrow's Saturday. No school. We'll work on that lasso throw and maybe ride out to the creek." Michael's eyes lit up. "Can Ma come too? And the twins?" Preston glanced toward Sophia, who was stirring something in a pot, pretending not to listen. "If Ma wants to come, she's welcome." "I want to come," Sophia said, her back still turned to them. "It's been too long since I've been further than the garden." After Michael finally drifted off to sleep, Preston and Sophia sat at the small table for their own meal. These quiet moments after the children were asleep had become precious to both of them, a chance to talk without interruption, to exist as adults rather than just caregivers. "Mrs. Hollister asked about you today," Preston said, breaking the comfortable silence. "She's hosting a social next Saturday and wants you to come. She says she never sees you in town anymore." Sophia pushed the food around her plate. "The twins make travel difficult and people talk." "Talk about what? Us, Preston?" She met his eyes directly. "A widow living with a man who's not her husband or kin. They talk." Preston set down his fork. "Let them talk. We know the truth." "Do we?" Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I'm not sure what the truth is anymore." The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken feelings and complications. Preston had grown to love Sophia and her children with a fierceness that surprised him, but he had never spoken of it. She was still mourning Thomas, still wearing the gold band on her finger. And Preston's past, the violent history he'd fled, made him question whether he had any right to love at all. "The truth," Preston finally said, "is that you and the children are safe here, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep it that way." Sophia nodded, but the slight slump of her shoulders suggested his answer had disappointed her somehow. They finished their meal in silence, and Sophia rose to clear the dishes. "I should check on Eclipse," Preston said, standing. "I rode him hard today." Outside, the night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Preston led Eclipse into the barn and began removing his saddle and brushing him down. The rhythmic motion was soothing, giving him time to process the day's events and the confusing conversation with Sophia. "She deserves better than this," he muttered to Eclipse, who nickered softly in response. "Better than a gunslinger trying to play farmer." The sound of the barn door opening made Preston turn. Sophia stood in the entrance, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "The twins woke up," she explained. "I've just gotten them back to sleep." Preston nodded, continuing to brush Eclipse. "You should rest. Tomorrow we'll be here before you know it." Sophia didn't leave. Instead, she moved closer, her skirts rustling in the hay. "Preston, there's something we need to discuss." The serious tone in her voice made him stop and face her. "What is it?" "I received a letter from my brother yesterday. He sent money for train tickets to Boston." She twisted her hands in her shawl. "He says it's time we joined him there. That it's no life for a woman and children out here." Preston felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He'd known this day might come, but he wasn't prepared for it. Not now. Not when the children called him Pa and Sophia's smile had become as necessary to him as air. "I see," he managed, his voice rough. "When would you leave? The end of the month, if we decide to go." She emphasized the if in a way that made Preston's heart leap with cautious hope. If Sophia took another step toward him. "The children are settled here. They love this place." "They love," she hesitated. "They love you." Preston set the brush down and closed the distance between them. "And what about their mother? What does she want?" In the dim light of the barn's single lantern, Sophia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "She's afraid. Afraid of staying and allowing herself to feel things she's not sure she has the right to feel. Afraid of going and spending the rest of her life wondering what might have been." Preston reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sophia, I have no right to ask you to stay. I'm not the man your brother would want for you. I've done things." "I know about Cheyenne," she interrupted. "People talk, remember? I know you were a gunfighter. I know why you left Wyoming." Preston dropped his hand. "Then you know why you should take your brother's offer." "What I know," Sophia said firmly, "is that for the past 8 months you've been nothing but kind and honorable. You've loved my children as your own. You've respected my grief and my boundaries. You've worked yourself to exhaustion to provide for us. It's not enough to make up for it's enough for me." She cut him off again. "The past is the past, Preston. We've all done things we regret. What matters is who we choose to be now." Before Preston could respond, a child's cry pierced the night. Sophia sighed. "Emma, she never stays down for long." "Go," Preston said. "We can talk more tomorrow." Sophia nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Think about what I said, Preston, about who we choose to be now." After she left, Preston finished tending to Eclipse and sat on a hay bale, turning Sophia's words over in his mind. For years, he'd been running from his past, convinced that a man with so much blood on his hands didn't deserve happiness or love. But Sophia saw something in him worth saving, something worth staying for. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Preston rose early, as was his habit, and prepared coffee before the rest of the household stirred. He was sitting on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the hills in shades of gold and pink when he heard the door open behind him. Michael emerged, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is it time for lasso practice, Pa?" Preston smiled and patted the space beside him. "Not yet, partner. Let's let your ma and sisters sleep a bit longer." Michael climbed onto the bench and leaned against Preston's side. "I don't want to go to Boston," he said suddenly. Preston's coffee cup stilled halfway to his lips. "You know about that?" Michael nodded solemnly. "I heard Ma reading the letter. Uncle George wants us to come live with him, but I don't want to. I want to stay here with you." Preston set his cup down and put his arm around the boy's thin shoulders. "Sometimes, Michael, grown-ups have to make hard choices. Your ma wants what's best for you and your sisters." "You're what's best," Michael insisted with a child's simple certainty. "And Ma smiles more when you're around. She used to cry every night after Pa died. Now she only cries sometimes." Preston swallowed hard, touched by the boy's observation and honesty. "Your ma's a strong woman. Whatever she decides, she'll make sure you and your sisters are taken care of. But what about you?" Michael looked up at him with eyes that seemed too knowing for a 5-year-old. "Who'll take care of you if we leave?" Before Preston could answer, the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. A rider was approaching fast from the direction of town. Preston recognized him as Jimmy Carson, the 17-year-old son of the general store owner. "Mr. Vance," the boy called as he reined in his horse. "Sheriff Turner sent me. There's trouble in town. The Blackwell gang's been spotted heading this way. Sheriff says they're looking for you." Preston's blood ran cold. The Blackwell gang, led by Harlan Blackwell, one of the most notorious outlaws in the territory. Preston had once ridden with them briefly, years ago, before he realized just how ruthless they truly were. He'd left after Harlan ordered the murder of a family who'd refused to pay protection money. The fact that they were looking for him now couldn't mean anything good. How many? Preston asked, standing and motioning for Michael to go inside. 6, including Harlan himself, Jimmy replied. They rode into town asking questions about a man matching your description. Sheriff wants everyone with women and children to head to town for safety. He's gathering men to form a posse. Preston nodded grimly. Tell the sheriff I appreciate the warning. We'll be heading to town shortly. As Jimmy rode off, Preston went inside to find Sophia already dressed and packing a bag, her face pale but composed. I heard, she said simply. How much time do we have? Not enough, Preston replied, strapping on his gun belt, something he rarely did anymore. I need to get you and the children to town. You'll be safer there. And you, Sophia paused in her packing. What will you do? Preston couldn't meet her eyes. Harlan Blackwell is my problem. I won't bring his violence to innocent people's doorsteps. So you'll face him alone. Sophia's voice rose with incredulity. 6 against 1. That's not bravery, Preston. That's suicide. I don't have a choice, Preston argued, checking his revolver. These men won't stop. They'll use anyone I care about to get to me. Then we'll face them together, Sophia insisted. The sheriff is forming a posse. You won't be alone. Preston shook his head. No, my priority is getting you and the children to safety after that. He holstered his gun with a practiced motion. After that, I'll do what needs to be done. Sophia stepped toward him, her green eyes flashing with determination. I lost one husband to violence. I won't lose. She stopped herself, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air between them. You won't lose what, Sophia? Preston asked softly. Instead of answering, she turned away and continued packing. We should hurry. The twins are still asleep. I'll wrap them in blankets for the journey. Within 30 minutes, they had loaded the wagon with essential supplies. Preston helped Sophia climb onto the wagon seat with Emma in her arms while he carried Ellie. Michael sat between them, unusually quiet, his small face solemn. Pa, he said as Preston flicked the reins to start the horses moving, are the bad men coming to hurt us? Preston exchanged a glance with Sophia before answering. No, son. The bad men have a quarrel with me, not with you, and I won't let them hurt you or your ma or your sisters. That's a promise. The journey to town was tense, with Preston constantly scanning the horizon for riders. They were halfway there when he spotted dust in the distance, riders approaching from the west, moving fast. Hold on, Preston said, snapping the reins to urge the horses to a faster pace. The wagon bounced and jostled over the rutted trail, causing the twins to wake and start crying. Sophia's voice immediately rose in song, soothing them despite the danger. Rock-a-bye, babies, in the treetop, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. The simple lullaby somehow calmed not just the twins but Michael as well, his fearful expression easing as he leaned against his mother. Even Preston felt the tension in his shoulders lessen slightly, as her clear voice carried over the rumble of the wagon wheels. But the riders were gaining on them. Preston could now make out 6 figures on horseback, moving with the easy confidence of men who were used to getting what they wanted through force. Sophia, Preston said urgently, take the reins. She looked at him in alarm. What are you going to do? Buy us time. He handed her the reins and moved to the back of the wagon. Keep going. Don't stop for anything. Sheriff Turner will have men watching for you on the road into town. Preston, no. Sophia cried, but he had already jumped from the moving wagon, rolling to absorb the impact and coming up with his revolver drawn. The riders slowed as they spotted him standing alone in the middle of the road, gun at his side. Preston recognized Harlan Blackwell, immediately tall and lean, with a silver-streaked beard and cold eyes that had seen too much death. Preston Vance, Harlan called, raising a hand to halt his men. Been a long time. Not long enough, Harlan, Preston replied evenly. What do you want? Harlan dismounted and walked a few paces forward. The other 5 men remained on their horses, hands hovering near their weapons. Is that any way to greet an old friend, especially one who's ridden 3 states to find you? We were never friends, Preston said. State your business and move on. Harlan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Straight to the point as always. Fine, I'm here about the Cheyenne job, the one you walked away from. Preston felt a chill. The Cheyenne job had been a bank robbery that Harlan had planned meticulously. Preston had backed out at the last minute when he discovered Harlan intended to kill everyone in the bank, including the teller who was supposedly helping them. His departure had forced Harlan to abort the plan. That was 3 years ago, Preston said. Ancient history. Not to me. Harlan's smile vanished. That job was going to set us up for life. Instead, I had to settle for small-time robberies and cattle rustling, all because you got squeamish. If you're here for an apology, you're wasting your time, Preston said, acutely aware of the wagon getting farther away with each passing moment. If you're here for revenge, well, that's a different matter. Harlan laughed. Always ready to draw, aren't you, Preston? But I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to offer you a chance to make things right. Make things right. There's a gold shipment coming through Helena next week. Army payroll heading to Fort Shaw. My information says it'll be lightly guarded, just 2 soldiers and the driver. With your help, we could take it clean. No fuss, no bloodshed, just like old times. Preston shook his head. There are no old times, Harlan. I'm not that man anymore. No. Harlan's eyes drifted to the disappearing wagon. Looks to me like you've set yourself up nice here. Wife, kids. A regular family man. Be a shame if something happened to ruin all that. Preston's grip tightened on his gun. Threaten them again and I'll kill you where you stand. Harlan held up his hands in mock surrender. Easy now, no threats, just stating facts. World's a dangerous place for a woman and children alone. They won't be alone, Preston said firmly, and they're under my protection. Your protection. Harlan sneered. The notorious Preston Vance, once the fastest gun west of the Mississippi, now playing house with a widow and her brats. You've gone soft, Preston. Maybe, Preston conceded. Or maybe I finally figured out what's worth fighting for. One of Harlan's men shifted nervously in his saddle. Boss, we should move on. Town's not far and they might have a posse forming. Harlan ignored him, his eyes locked on Preston. One job, Preston, that's all I'm asking. One job to square things between us, then you can go back to your little domestic paradise and I'll be out of your life for good. And if I refuse, Harlan's face hardened, then I can't guarantee the safety of your new family. Men like us don't get happy endings, Preston. We both know that. Preston's mind raced. He knew Harlan well enough to recognize that this was no idle threat. If he refused, Harlan would come after Sophia and the children. If he agreed, he'd be drawn back into the life he'd fought so hard to escape. Before he could respond, the sound of multiple riders approaching from the direction of town caught their attention. At least a dozen men on horseback crested the hill, led by Sheriff Turner, and to Preston's surprise, Sophia riding alongside him. Harlan cursed. This isn't over, Preston. You have until sundown tomorrow to decide. Meet me at the old Miller place if you're in. If not. He let the threat hang in the air as he mounted his horse and motioned for his men to follow. They galloped away, taking a trail that led into the hills. The posse reached Preston a few minutes later. Sheriff Turner, a grizzled veteran of the frontier, dismounted and clapped him on the shoulder. You all right, Vance? Preston nodded, his eyes on Sophia. I told you to keep going. And I chose not to listen, she replied defiantly. The children are safe in town with Mrs. Turner. I couldn't leave you to face them alone. Sheriff Turner looked between them, then cleared his throat. Blackwell's bad news, Vance. What did he want with you? Preston hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. We have history. He wants me to join his gang for a robbery. And will you? The sheriff asked bluntly. No, Preston said firmly. But he's threatened Sophia and the children if I don't. The sheriff nodded grimly. Then we'll need to be ready. I can deputize some men, keep a watch on your place. But Blackwell's crafty. If he wants trouble, he'll find a way to make it. I appreciate the offer, Sheriff, Preston said, but this is my fight. I won't risk other men's lives. It's our fight now, Sophia interjected. This is our home, and we'll defend it together. Preston looked at her with a mixture of admiration and frustration. In the months he'd known her, he'd never seen this fierce, warrior side of the gentle woman who sang lullabies to crying children. Sophia, no, Preston, she cut him off. I'm tired of men deciding what's best for me. Thomas did it when he insisted on homesteading in dangerous territory, despite my concerns. My brother's doing it now with his demands that we move to Boston. And you're doing it by trying to face these outlaws alone. Her words landed like physical blows. Preston had never considered that his protective instincts might be seen as controlling or dismissive. He'd only wanted to keep her safe. Sheriff Turner coughed uncomfortably. Well, regardless of who's deciding what, you both need protection, Mrs. Carter, you and the children will stay in town tonight. Vance, I suggest you do the same. Preston shook his head. No, if I don't show at the homestead tonight, Harlan might think I'm running scared. He might take it out on innocent people in town. Then I'm coming with you, Sophia declared. Absolutely not, Preston and the sheriff said in unison. Sophia's chin lifted. The children are safe with Mrs. Turner. I won't sit in town wondering if you're alive or dead, Preston. Not again. Not after Thomas. The determination in her eyes told Preston this was an argument he wouldn't win. And deep down, a selfish part of him was glad. The thought of facing Harlan and his gang alone had been daunting. Having Sophia's strength beside him made the prospect less bleak. Fine, he conceded, but we do this my way. If there's trouble, you hide, no heroics. Sophia nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Agreed, no heroics from either of us. Sheriff Turner looked between them again and sighed. I'll have 3 men patrol the road between town and your place tonight. If you hear shooting, it means Blackwell's men are coming. Get out and head for town immediately. Preston thanked the sheriff, and soon he and Sophia were riding back to their homestead, accompanied by 2 deputies who would help secure the property before returning to their patrol route. As they approached the cabin, Preston couldn't help but see it through new eyes, not just as a shelter he'd built, but as a home he'd created with Sophia and the children. The thought of Harlan Blackwell violating that sanctuary made his blood boil. What are you thinking? Sophia asked as they dismounted in front of the cabin. Preston secured his horse before answering. I'm thinking that I've spent 3 years running from my past and it found me anyway. I'm thinking that I've brought danger to your doorstep, just like I always feared I would. Sophia stepped closer to him, her face softening. Preston, danger was at my doorstep long before you arrived. If not for you, my children and I might not have survived that first winter. That doesn't excuse the risk you're facing now, he argued. Harlan Blackwell is dangerous, Sophia. More dangerous than you can imagine. I can imagine quite a lot, she replied quietly. I watched my husband die, Preston. I held my children as they cried for their father. I know what danger looks like. Preston wanted to pull her into his arms, to promise her that nothing bad would ever happen again, but he knew better than to make promises he might not be able to keep. Instead, he nodded toward the cabin. Let's get inside. We should prepare just in case. The deputies helped them secure the windows and doors, then left to join the patrol. As night fell, Preston and Sophia sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his spare revolver, which he intended for Sophia to use if necessary. Have you ever fired one of these? He asked as he demonstrated how to load the chambers. Sophia nodded. Thomas taught me. I'm not a particularly good shot, but I can hit a target at close range. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Preston said, handing her the loaded weapon. They worked in silence for a while, preparing for a siege that might never come. Finally, as the clock struck 10, Sophia put down the ammunition she'd been counting and looked directly at Preston. If we survive this, she said quietly, what then? Preston met her gaze. What do you mean? I mean, do we go back to the way things were? You working at the Hollister ranch, me tending the children, both of us pretending there's nothing between us. Or do I take the children to Boston as my brother wants? Preston set aside the rifle he'd been cleaning. Is that what you want? To go to Boston. What I want, Sophia said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes, is a life where my children are safe and loved, where they don't cry themselves to sleep worrying that the people they care about won't come home, where I don't have to constantly look over my shoulder for the next threat. I want that for you too, Preston said softly, even if it means you go to Boston. Sophia reached across the table and took his hand. What if what I want is right here? What if, despite the danger and the uncertainty and the gossip in town, what I want is this life we've built? With you, Preston's heart hammered in his chest. Sophia, I'm not the man you deserve. My past is past, she finished for him. Preston, I don't care who you were. I care who you are now. The man who built this cabin with his own hands. The man who rocks my daughters to sleep when they're fussy. The man who's teaching my son to throw a lasso and ride a horse. The man I've come to, she stopped, as if afraid to say the words. The man you've come to what? Preston prompted, his voice hoarse. Before she could answer, a sound from outside drew their attention, a horse's whinny, quickly silenced. Preston was on his feet in an instant, extinguishing the lamp and moving to the window. In the moonlight, he could make out several figures moving stealthily toward the cabin. "They're here," he whispered. "At least 4 of them. Get under the bed and stay there." Sophia clutched the revolver he'd given her. "I'm not hiding." "Sophia, please," a voice called from outside, interrupting him. "Preston Vance, come out and talk. No need for this to get messy." Preston recognized the voice, not Harlan, but his right-hand man, a brutal enforcer named Silas Reed. "Harlan's not with them," Preston murmured. "This isn't about the job offer. This is a hit." Sophia's face paled, but her grip on the gun remained steady. "What do we do?" Preston thought quickly. "The deputies should be nearby. If we can hold them off long enough, the gunfire will bring help. And if it doesn't?" He met her eyes in the darkness. "Then we fight together." Sophia nodded, moving to take position at the window opposite his. "Together," Preston called back to the men outside. "What happened to having until tomorrow to decide, Silas?" "Harlan got impatient," Silas replied. "Said if you were going to refuse anyway, might as well take care of business now, save everyone some time." "Thoughtful of him," Preston said dryly. "Where is he?" "Around," Silas answered vaguely. "Look, Vance, we don't want to hurt the woman or the kids. Send her out and we can settle this man to man." Preston exchanged a glance with Sophia, who shook her head firmly. "She's not coming out, Silas, and neither am I. You want me, you'll have to come and get me." Silas's laugh was ugly. "Have it your way." The first shots came seconds later, a volley of bullets shattering the windows and splintering the door. Preston and Sophia ducked down, covering their heads as glass rained down on them. "Stay low," Preston instructed, crawling toward the back of the cabin. "They'll try to surround us. We need to keep them from getting in." Sophia followed, her face set with determination. "The back door, I'll cover it," Preston assured her. "You watch the front. If anyone tries to come through, shoot. Don't hesitate." For the next several minutes, they defended their home against the increasingly aggressive attack. Preston managed to wound one of the outlaws who tried to break in through the back, while Sophia's warning shots kept the others at bay in the front. But it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. The outlaws had the advantage of numbers and position, and Preston and Sophia were quickly running low on ammunition. "Preston," Sophia called urgently, "I hear horses." He strained to listen over the gunfire. She was right, several horses were approaching fast from the direction of town. The deputies had heard the shooting and were coming to their aid. "Hold on," Preston shouted to her. "Help is coming." The outlaws heard it too. Their attack intensified, as if they were determined to finish the job before reinforcements arrived. A kerosene lamp, hit by a stray bullet, crashed to the floor and ignited. Flames began to spread quickly along the wooden floorboards. "Fire!" Sophia cried, stomping at the flames with her boots. "Preston, the cabin's on fire." Preston abandoned his position at the back door and rushed to help her, but the fire was spreading too rapidly. Smoke filled the small cabin, making it hard to see and breathe. "We have to get out," he coughed, pulling Sophia toward the back door. "Stay low under the smoke." "But they're waiting for us out there." "We have no choice," Preston insisted. "The deputies are coming. We just need to stay alive until they get here." As they reached the back door, Preston paused to listen. The shooting had stopped. The outlaws were likely repositioning, expecting them to flee the burning cabin. "When I open the door," Preston whispered, "run for the barn. Don't stop, don't look back. I'll be right behind you." Sophia clutched his arm. "Promise me." He pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. "I promise." Preston counted to 3, then threw open the door. Sophia bolted out into the night, running low and fast toward the barn 30 yards away. Preston followed, firing his remaining bullets at the shadows where he suspected the outlaws were hiding. A bullet whizzed past his ear. Another hit the ground at his feet. But then answering gunfire came from the approaching riders. The deputies had arrived and were engaging the outlaws. Preston reached the barn seconds after Sophia, slamming the door shut behind them and dropping the heavy wooden bar into place to secure it. "Are you hit?" he demanded, running his hands over her arms and shoulders in the darkness, checking for injuries. "No," she gasped, her face illuminated by the orange glow of the burning cabin through the barn's high windows. "You." "I'm fine," he assured her, though his side burned where a bullet had grazed him. We need to stay quiet. The deputies will handle this." Outside, the gunfight continued. Preston led Sophia to the back of the barn where the horses were stabled, nervous from the noise and the smell of smoke. If they needed to make a quick escape, the animals were their best chance. "Preston," Sophia whispered as they crouched behind a pile of hay, "if we don't, we will," he interrupted. "We'll get through this, Sophia. I'm not losing you." She looked at him in the dim light, her expression fierce and tender at once. "I love you, Preston Vance. I think I have for months now. I was just too afraid to admit it, too guilty about Thomas, too worried about what people would think." Preston's heart soared despite the danger surrounding them. Sophia, a crash from the front of the barn cut him off. Someone was trying to break in. Preston pushed Sophia farther back into the shadows and raised his gun, only to realize he was out of ammunition. "Stay here," he whispered, picking up a pitchfork from nearby. It wasn't much of a weapon against guns, but it was better than nothing. The barn door splintered inward and a figure stepped through. In the dim light, Preston recognized Harlan Blackwell himself, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder, his gun trained on Preston. "Should have taken the job, Preston," Harlan said, his voice strained with pain. "Could have been easy money, could have been just like old times." Preston shifted, keeping himself between Harlan and Sophia's hiding place. "The old times weren't as good as you remember, Harlan. Better than dying in a burning barn with a woman who doesn't know what kind of man you really are," Harlan sneered. "Did you tell her about Omaha, Preston? About the bank guard who begged for his life? About his wife and child who watched him die?" Preston's grip tightened on the pitchfork. "I've done things I'm not proud of. I've never denied that. You're a killer, Preston, same as me. You can play house with your widow and her brats, but it doesn't change what you are." "You're wrong," Preston said steadily. "People can change, I have." Harlan laughed bitterly. "Tell that to the ghosts that haunt you at night. The difference between us, Harlan, is that you enjoy killing. I never did. It was just a means to an end: survival, money, respect. But there are better ways to earn those things, better ways to live." "Pretty words," Harlan said, leveling his gun. "Let's see if they comfort you in the afterlife." Preston tensed, preparing to lunge with the pitchfork, knowing he'd likely die in the attempt but hoping it would give Sophia a chance to escape. But before either man could move, a gunshot rang out. Harlan jerked, a look of surprise crossing his face, and fell forward onto the barn floor. Behind him stood Sophia, Preston's spare revolver smoking in her hand. Her face was ashen, but her eyes were clear and determined. "I found another bullet," she said simply. Preston dropped the pitchfork and rushed to her, pulling her into his arms as she began to shake with delayed reaction. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's over." Outside, the gunfire had ceased. Voices called Preston's and Sophia's names, the deputies searching for them. Preston called back, keeping one arm around Sophia as he led her out of the barn. The scene that greeted them was one of devastation. Their cabin, the home Preston had built with such care, was now a blazing inferno, lighting up the night sky. Two of Harlan's men lay dead in the yard. Another was being handcuffed by a deputy, while Silas Reed was nowhere to be seen. Sheriff Turner approached them, his face grim. "Silas got away. Took a bullet in the leg but managed to escape on horseback. We'll find him." Preston nodded, too exhausted to care much at the moment. "What about our men?" One deputy wounded. "Not seriously, he'll recover." The sheriff looked at the burning cabin. "I'm sorry about your home." Preston tightened his arm around Sophia. "We're alive, that's what matters." Sophia leaned into him, her voice soft but steady. "We can rebuild together." The word hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. "Together," Preston agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "But first, we need to get back to town. The children will be worried." The ride back to town was quiet, both Preston and Sophia lost in their own thoughts about the night's events and what they meant for their future. The realization that they had nearly lost each other had stripped away the last of their hesitations and doubts. Life on the frontier was too uncertain, too precious to waste in fear and denial. When they reached the sheriff's house, they found Michael and the twins asleep in a makeshift bed, watched over by Mrs. Turner. Michael woke as they entered, his small face lighting up with relief. "Pa, Ma, you're okay," he cried, launching himself into Preston's arms. Preston held him tight, meeting Sophia's eyes over the boy's head. "Yes, son, we're okay. Is our house gone?" Michael asked, his voice small. Jimmy Carson's pa came by and said there was a fire. Sophia joined them, stroking Michael's hair. "Yes, sweetheart, our house is gone. But we're going to build a new one, even better than before." "Where will we live until then?" Michael wondered. Sheriff Turner, who had followed them inside, cleared his throat. "The old Rogers place on the edge of town is vacant, has been since the Rogers family moved to California last fall. It's not much, but it's solid and weathertight. You're welcome to use it until you can rebuild." Preston thanked the sheriff, grateful for the community's support despite his checkered past. It seemed that in the year he'd lived among them, working honestly and keeping to himself, he'd earned a measure of respect and acceptance. The next few days were a blur of activity. The Rogers place, as the sheriff had said, was small but sturdy, a two-room cabin with a lean-to kitchen. It would be cramped for a family of 5, but it was a roof over their heads. Word of the attack spread quickly through the small community. To Preston's surprise, offers of help poured in. Neighbors brought food, clothing, and household items to replace what had been lost in the fire. The Hollister Ranch, where Preston worked, provided a wagon of lumber to help start the rebuilding process. Even Sophia's brother sent a telegram with promises of financial assistance, though notably absent was any further mention of Boston. 5 days after the attack, Preston and Sophia stood on the charred remains of their homestead, surveying the damage in the light of day. Little remained of the cabin, just the stone chimney standing like a solitary sentinel over the ashes of their former home. "It seems appropriate somehow," Sophia mused, her hand in Preston's. "The old life burned away, making room for something new." Preston squeezed her hand. "Is that what you want, something new, with me?" She turned to face him, her eyes clear and certain. "Yes, that's exactly what I want." Preston took both her hands in his. "Sophia, I'm not the man I was 3 years ago, or even 1 year ago when you and the children came into my life. You've changed me, made me better, made me want to be worthy of the trust you and the children place in me every day." "You are worthy," Sophia insisted. "More than worthy." Preston shook his head. "I've done terrible things, Sophia, things I'll regret for the rest of my life. But if you'll have me, I promise to spend every day trying to be the man you deserve, the husband and father this family needs." Tears filled Sophia's eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you, Preston Vance?" "I am," he confirmed, dropping to one knee despite the ashes that clung to his pants. "Sophia Carter, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, of allowing me to be a father to your children, of building a new life together, right here on this land?" Sophia's smile was radiant through her tears. "Yes, Preston, yes to all of it." He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and hope he'd kept contained for so long. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, a small voice interrupted them. "Does this mean we get to call you Pa for real now?" Michael asked from where he'd been playing nearby with a stick and some pebbles. Preston laughed and beckoned the boy over. "If that's what you want, son." "I'd be honored." Michael considered this seriously. "And the twins, they'll call you Pa too when they start talking properly." "Yes," Sophia answered, ruffling her son's hair. "We're going to be a real family, Michael, all of us together." The boy nodded, satisfied. "Good. And we'll build a bigger house. With my own room." Preston and Sophia exchanged amused glances. "Yes," Preston promised. "A bigger house with plenty of room for everyone, and maybe—" He glanced at Sophia, who nodded encouragingly, "maybe even room for more brothers or sisters someday." Michael's eyes widened. "More babies, like the twins?" "Perhaps," Sophia said, blushing slightly. "Would you like that, as long as they don't cry all night?" Michael decided pragmatically. "The twins used to cry so much until you sang to them, Ma." Preston pulled Sophia closer to his side. "Your mother's voice is magic that way. It soothes all of us." They stood together as a family, looking out over the land that had been witness to so much tragedy and triumph. The future stretched before them, not without challenges, but filled with promise. 2 months later, Preston and Sophia were married in a simple ceremony in the town church. Michael proudly served as ring bearer, while Mrs. Hollister held the twins, who had recently taken their first steps and were becoming more adventurous by the day. By then, the new house was well underway, larger and sturdier than the original, with separate bedrooms for the children and a wide front porch where the family could gather in the evenings. Preston continued working at the Hollister Ranch, but he was saving to buy his own cattle, determined to build a legacy for his children. Silas Reed was eventually caught and brought to justice, ending the last threat from Preston's past life. Sheriff Turner assured them that with Harlan Blackwell dead and his gang disbanded, they could finally live without looking over their shoulders. On a warm summer evening a year after the attack, Preston rode home from the Hollister Ranch, his day's work complete. As he crested the hill overlooking their property, he paused to take in the sight that never failed to fill his heart with gratitude. The new house stood proud and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney despite the season, suggesting Sophia was baking. Michael was in the corral, practicing his lasso throws on a wooden post. The twins, now nearly 2 years old, were playing in the garden under the watchful eye of their mother. And there was something new as well. Sophia's slightly rounded belly, visible beneath her apron, carrying the newest member of their family, due to arrive in the winter. As Preston rode closer, he heard the familiar sound of crying. Emma, it seemed, had fallen and scraped her knee. Michael was trying to console his sister without much success. Sophia appeared from the house, wiping flour from her hands on her apron, and gathered Emma into her arms. Then, just as she had done countless times before, Sophia began to sing. Her voice, clear and soothing, floated across the yard to where Preston sat on his horse, transfixed by the beauty of the moment. Emma's cries subsided, Michael returned to his practice, and even Ellie paused in her play to listen to her mother's song. "Hush now, my darling, be still now, don't cry. I'll sing you a lullaby, a sweet lullaby." Preston dismounted and led Eclipse toward the house, a smile spreading across his face. This was his life now, far removed from the violence and emptiness of his past. A life filled with children's laughter, a woman's love, and the sweet sound of lullabies. As Sophia spotted him and waved, her face lighting up with welcome, Preston knew he had found something he never thought possible for a man like him: redemption, forgiveness, and the purest form of love. Not just the passionate love he shared with Sophia, but the unconditional love of a family who saw him not for who he had been, but for who he had become. That night, after the children were asleep, Preston and Sophia sat on their new porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her waist, their child growing between them. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Sophia asked softly. "If I hadn't lost Thomas, if you hadn't found us that night, if Harlan Blackwell had never come looking for you." Preston considered the question carefully before answering. "I think about it sometimes. But then I look at our life now, at you, at the children, at this home we've built together, and I can't imagine any other path that could have led us here." Sophia smiled, placing his hand on her belly where their child kicked vigorously. "Nor can I. For all the hardship and loss, I wouldn't trade this life for any other." "Nor would I," Preston agreed, kissing her gently. "Not for all the gold in Montana." As if on cue, a child's cry drifted through the open window. Ellie this time, disturbed by a dream perhaps. Sophia started to rise, but Preston stopped her with a gentle hand. "Rest," he said, standing. "I'll go." He entered the house quietly and made his way to the children's room where Ellie sat up in her small bed, tears streaming down her face. Preston lifted her into his arms, rocking her gently as he began to sing the lullaby he had heard so many times from Sophia's lips. His voice was not as sweet or clear as Sophia's, but it was warm and reassuring. Ellie's cries quieted as she nestled against his chest, her tiny hand clutching his shirt. From the doorway, Sophia watched, her heart full. This was the man she had married, not the gunslinger from Wyoming, not even the solitary homesteader who had taken in a widow and her children, but this gentle father singing his daughter to sleep. As Preston laid Ellie back in her bed and turned to find Sophia watching him, the love that passed between them needed no words. It was in the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, in the way his hand automatically reached for hers, in the home they had built from ashes, in the family they had formed from separate sorrows. It was a love born of hardship and resilience, tempered by danger and loss, strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. A love as vast and enduring as the Montana sky above them, as deep as their roots in this wild, beautiful land. A love that, like Sophia's lullabies, had the power to soothe wounded hearts and quiet crying children. A love that had brought the notorious Preston Vance home at last.